Alright guys, in this video I'm going to talk about the homework. Now I'm going to start a completely new project and I'm going to go through the process of getting this optimized for my machine, so your start will look something like this. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to launch the UEFI Early Access. I'm going to go into games. I'm going to do, say, a third person, and I'm going to call this 160. Oh, excuse me, homework 160 demo. I want to make sure that my stuff is turned on, just like I talked about. Make sure it's saved in the right spot, and I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Good, good. Let the hate flow through you. You'll learn to love Unreal, or you'll learn to hate to love it, or learn to love to hate it. I'm going to update. Cool. I'm going to dismiss. No, this is going to run like not great. Oh, it's so bad. Okay, no big deal. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my scalability. It's on Epic, so that's going to be fine. I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to go to my project settings. I'm going to go to my rendering tab here. I'm going to scroll down. There's Lumen. I'm going to turn Lumen off. No reflections. And then I'm going to turn my virtual shadow maps to just regular shadow maps. And then I'm going to look for temporal super resolution. That's under the default settings. I haven't found out where this one is just yet, but I'm just going to try to do this fast. I'm going to turn that to false. Cool. So turn that all off. See if I get my performance back. Yep, performance is back. Cool. Okay, so we've got our little guy here. As you can see, he can run around. He's all happy. This is the Unreal guy. He is exactly 6 feet tall. You will be using him a lot as a yardstick because he is exactly 6 feet tall. If you don't like him, and I'm not going to shame anyone who wants to use the Unreal LAS. There is a female mannequin as well if you care about that. The default is the male one. No big deal. Alright. Now I'm just going to go ahead and set up this project the way like if I was going to do your guys' homework. I'm going to go ahead and select this wall, control left click, control left click, control left click, and delete all of that. Oh no, as you can see that we have a lighting problem. That's where we need to do a lighting bake. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to grab a bunch of stuff and I'm just going to delete it. Delete it, delete, 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 delete. Now the reason why we see a lot of that is because I changed the lighting from Lumen to a baked lighting solution. That's what the difference is. Lumen is real time. Anything that is not real time creates what's called a shadow map. That's what we're seeing right there. No big deal. Once we get rid of that, and once we get rid of everything that we don't want, I'm going to go ahead and do a lighting build here. In fact, I'm going to get rid of the third person thing. Or if you feel saucy, I'm going to hold shift and I'll move this up here. Good enough. I can be up there for now. What we see here is a player start. I'll talk about that later. And we see a bunch of other things that I'll talk about as I go with discussing more of the engine. But for now, let's not mess with this too much. Once this is already set, I'm going to go into build, and I'm just going to build lighting only, and I'll be back when this is finished. That only took a handful of seconds. I actually just grabbed a bottle of water. Okay, so here we are in our ready set environment. Now for you guys, by default, I believe the content drawer, or rather the content browser, is open. By default, I like to leave mine closed, but if you hit Control and Spacebar, you can pop it up and pop it down. It's almost like playing whack-a-mole. Go ahead and open up your content browser, and as you can see, I can talk about some elements to the engine that aren't available, at least initially. This is your file structure for the project. Let's start by talking about the difference between a project and a level. I'm going to control spacebar to turn off my content browser, or my content drawer as they're referring to it now, and talk about the engine as a whole. What we are seeing right now in the viewport, which is this section right here, is your level. A level is a file that can be saved in the project. Your Unreal project is all of the packages, all of the files, all the assets, all the textures, all the images, everything that goes into the engine stored in one location. For example, if I open up the content drawer, and I don't think it'll let me navigate from here. We don't have to worry about collections because that's not going to be used for this particular project right now. And I right-click Content, and I show an Explorer. This is what pops up. Okay? Does everybody see up here the HW160 demo, what I named this project? This is the entirety of your project. And if we zoom out once more, here is the project itself, our HW160 demo. This entire folder is the project. Does everybody see this little blue icon right here? This is not your project. This uProject file, and I wish to the goddess that they would change the name. This uProject file is not your project. This uProject file is a file that helps Windows usher the files where they need to go so that Windows does not break your file structure when you are transitioning from project to project inside of Unreal Engine 5. I keep saying UE4, but I'm trying to stop myself. This singular file is not your project. Your project is this entire folder located underneath your Unreal Projects folder. You can see I have tons and even more inside of other folders. If you were ever to send me your project, you would zip this up. You would not send me your config, your content. You wouldn't send me an individual file unless I particularly asked for a content folder. Typically speaking, when you are inside the engine, what is visible over here is the content folder because you don't need the rest of that stuff in the content in order to build the level. What does that mean? Well, as you can see, we have a save all function down here, and we have save current level as. We have a save function right here, saves the current level to the disk, and then we have a content drawer that has all your content. Saving a level just saves the position of objects that have been placed in the world. If you import an object, which we will be working on in a few weeks, that object, or probably I think actually it's in the next class, that object is only saved to your project if you save anything that gets modified or changed in the content folder. I'll show that in the future. But anything new that hasn't been saved, for example, if I go into the, let's go ahead and make a new folder here. I'm going to right click the background and make a new folder. I'm going to call this new stuff, new underscore stuff. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a material. I'm going to call this my first material. I'm going to call it my first mat. Actually, material underscore is the correct name. Material underscore first mat. Does everybody see how this object now has an asterisk? I'm going to go ahead and hit save the current level. And I'm going to go ahead and bump open the content drawer here. Wait a second. Mr. Figueroa, what's going on? I just hit save. Why do I still have this asterisk? Let's try it again. When you save what is in your level, you are just saving what is in the level for the viewport, or what's in the world. I'll talk about the world outliner shortly. The content browser is its own bespoke segment or own bespoke section of the engine. If you want to save something, you either have to right-click it and save it manually, or hit Control-S to save it, or you can hit Save All, which saves all your modified assets. You will get a window like this that pops up, hey, there's an asset that wants to be saved. It's located in this file, and it is a material. Do you want to save it? You can uncheck or check it, and if we hit Save Selected, boom, that is saved. Saving the stuff in the level is different than saving stuff in your content folder, or excuse me, the content drawer. Content are things like textures, assets, like I already explained. Stuff in the level that is stuff that has been dragged into the world that now has a presence in the world. And saving an object in the world does not mean it's saved in the content folder. I strongly encourage you that if you are just working on levels or level design and you are not using a content folder or making any edits, this is a save you want to use. But just to be safe, always check to see if the content folder wants you to save something and hit Save All periodically. Save All saves everything in the content folder, but it does not save your level layout. That's the thing. It saves everything in content, but it does not save your level layout. You have to save your level layout. That's kind of how it works. There are some caveats, obviously, but it is absolutely important that you keep that in mind, that the world and the content browser are two separate things in UE5, and they always have been that way. Let's go ahead and cover the interface here real quick and talk about what we're looking at here. Up here is your toolbar. We can add things to the project, lights, shapes, cinematics, visual effects. This also appears in the content browser as well. So we have our lights, we have shapes. This used to be part of the placement panel for those of you who were UE4 folks, but this gives you an idea of how to create things fairly quickly. It's placed up here now. You don't have to worry about it anymore because this is now located up here. This allows you to focus whichever content browser that you want if you have multiple content browsers, and it's our access to Kixel Bridge. We'll worry about that in the future. This is access to our blueprints. We don't have to worry about right now. And this is access to excuse me, my voice is going, cinematics. We won't worry about this until later. Up here is your toolbar. We have File, which allows us to modify or save this file. We can save our levels. We can favorite certain levels. We can go and open up recent levels. We can save current levels. We can import, export, create new projects, or create new levels from here. For example, I'm going to save this current level as, let me go ahead and open up the content drawer here because we don't have a levels folder. I'm going to highlight the content folder. I like to right-click the background, but you can also do it over here. You hit new folder. I'm going to call this maps. Cool, we now have a maps folder. Now I've made some changes to this folder. I'm going to save the current level to the disk, which is a default level, but let's say I want to save the current level as something else. Now this is saved, by default, the third person map is saved to the third person map folder. But we want to go ahead and save this in our maps folder, and I'm going to go ahead and call this my first homework map. And hit save. Cool, cool. So that's saved. That's in my maps folder. Let's see where they're up. See, our third person movement. Our maps is being saved, and here's our third person example map. We've already saved over it, but now we can destroy it, or we can do anything, or we have our version of it, my first homework map right here in our maps folder. Typically speaking, I will make a maps folder for anything that I want to. So let's go ahead and go File, New Level, and I'm just going to create a new default level. I'm not going to put anything in it. As you can see, I still have all the performance that I've wanted. But now if I hit save, because it wasn't already opened by the third person example map, it doesn't know where to put this. So I'm going to call this level 2 underscore MAP, because you should always use nomenclature to help you find your files. Believe me, it does matter. And I misnamed this without putting an underscore. I just like naming things that I can find them very easily so I can figure out what the heck I'm looking at. And if we hit save, and then we bump our content browser, we can see that we have a level 2 map and a level 2 map with build data. Don't delete the build data. This is just something that Unreal makes when a file does not have build data. That should stay with it. I'm going to go ahead and select my previous map, and I hit F2 to rename it, and I'm going to put an underscore where my map is. This is just good file management. Now, I can go ahead and reopen my first homework map, and I can open up my second map. No problem. Oh, I meant to bump it closed, but it actually just did something else. Okay. Let's go ahead and go back to contact folder. Control spacebar is a terrible hotkey for that. So as you can see, we can navigate between levels, or we can go to open level and we can navigate to our 2 different levels here. So for example, if I was going to make this into a level, I'd go ahead and go into top perspective. That's my forward, so I'd do this. Oh. I'd hold down Alt to make a copy. That's a nice thing about moving and copying. Hold down Alt to make a copy, hold down Shift to move with it. Cool. Select each of these floors. Hit F. Zoom in a little bit. Hold on Alt to make a copy. And hold down Alt to make a copy. Let's make sure that we cinch that up a little tighter. There we go. And then remember, you can press Alt-G or go back to perspective here. Escape to deselect. Now we have our player start. If we hit play, I have access to this. Now as you can see, I've got a warning that says that my lighting needs to be rebuilt. That has to do with playing. No big deal. I'll talk about that in a sec. That just means that I've changed some things that the lighting wants to be rebuilt. No big deal. But we've changed this, and if we look, our level 2 map now has a little asterisk. And if we bump open our maps folder, we can see that our level 2 map now needs to be saved. I'm going to hit Control S just to quick save it. It's the same thing as hitting this button right here. And now our map is saved. Now, I'm going to bump the content browser. If we go back to the first homework map, we can see this map is still open. But if we go back to level 2 map, we see that this is still open. Awesome. Let's go ahead and bump that down. Up here is your Activate Select mode. This is your default mode that you should be in. We also have access to landscape editing. Talk about that in the future. Foliage, trees, brushes, rocks. A mesh paint mode. I usually don't touch that until the advanced class. Fracture editing mode. This deals with physics and how to fracture objects in the scene. And of course, our brush editing mode, which is kind of a pseudo... I want to say it's like having hard surface tools for you Maya Max users. I don't necessarily like using it, but I do use it when I'm doing some level prototyping. This becomes really important later. We have the play button, which allows you automatically to load into the world and start playing the game. We also have this little 3-dot system over here that allows us to play in either selected viewport, the mobile preview if you have a mobile game set up, a new editor window, a standalone game, or a simulate. Let's not worry about these two. I would strongly encourage you not to select them. But if you like having another window pop up, we can select New Editor Window Pi, and it pops another window. I personally like moving windows over to my other monitor that I'm doing testing on, but as you can see, the window plays just like any other game. And now when you hit play, you see that the play button is modified. It will always pop up the window. Personally, while I'm starting, I like selected viewport, but if I need to do some testing for some blueprint stuff, I will have another window pop up because that makes my life a little bit easier. Let's hit escape to get out. Let's not worry about platforms. I'll teach you guys how that works in the future when we're shipping. Over here on the right, we have our settings, obviously. We have the standard Windows stuff. Up here, it's really important to kind of keep in mind because this has what version of the engine we have, what build configuration, what graphics it's using, and what build that this version of the engine is using. Over on the right here, we have access to the World Outliner. The World Outliner is a list of everything that's located in this particular world. So as you can see, I made a copy of this floor, and if we use the up and down arrow keys on our next to our number pad, we can go through and see everything that is in the world and highlight it. If something is highlighted, it will be highlighted in the world. We have the ability to search as well. We have the ability to create folders if we like to be able to organize things, and I typically do. We'll talk about that in the future. And of course, we have the ability to show specific things and find things and choose things in which world that we're in. This is when we're level streaming. This will be a little bit more advanced in the future. The World Outliner is the contents of everything in the world. It is not the same as the content browser. The content browser is everything in the project. Some things don't always appear on every level. The content browser contains everything in the folder in the game, or in the game as a whole, in the project. The World Outliner contains everything in the current level. Actors are objects that can be placed in the world and interacted with, and it shows how many are selected. By default, you guys won't have the world settings on, but if we go to Windows, and then you go to World Settings, we'll talk about world partition in the future. That should pop up. I like to have them both open myself. The Details panel here shows the details of the object that is being selected. We're not going to worry too much about this for now, but what it does is it shows its location in the world. As you can see, I've moved these objects a very specific distance away from each other. In location, rotation, and scale locations in the world. And you can see you can zoom, you can change the size of these menus as well. Bear in mind, Unreal can also be skinned to different colors. I'll cover that in the future. I don't know if some people don't like black for some reason. It's whatever. It's the color they picked. It used to be like a cream white back in the day. If you have an object or anything selected, it shows the options available to that object and the settings that you can set for it. As you can see, it's the floor is a static mesh and it has a texture on it. We can turn physics on. We can set up collision for it. By default, this object does have collision. We can mess with the lighting settings. We can change renderings. We can change HLODs. I'll talk about all this in the future. But everything about the component that we have selected shows up here. Inside the details, however, we can see this floor has other components in it. If we want to affect very specific components of what this object is, we can select the object and it limits our components, or it limits our options to what the component can contain. So you can see we only have limited options, but the instance here has a bunch more options that we can work with that are related to the engine. We don't have to worry about this too much. This just shows how the componentry system works. This shows how many things go into making the floor. In this particular case, the floor exists as an object, and this object is comprised of a static mesh with various components. All right, that's pretty straightforward. And it is at this point that you can pick whichever one of these two scenes that you've made. This one seems to run a little bit better during my recording. And we can get started with the actual demo. Pardon me, I forgot one section here. As you can see, we have this nice little dock window up here that I haven't talked about. We have the ability to have viewport options. This controls our viewport options such as our field of view. We can look at our game view. We can set bookmarks. Bookmarks are just places that we can set where the camera view is. It's actually fairly useful. I'll show that in the future. We can create cameras. We can take high resolution screenshots. We can change the layout of the engine, meaning if we don't like this layout, we can change it. And we can access advanced settings for the viewport. That just takes us into the editor preferences. We have our different perspective viewports, our perspective and our orthographic viewports, default versus cinematic viewport. We can play around with it later. Our different lighting settings. Detail lighting, lighting only, lighting complexity, shader complexity, so on and so forth. I'll talk about these more as we go. And over here we have the ability to see what objects are in the world. We can hide objects. For example, we can hide static meshes. If we hide static meshes, we hide all the static meshes, including the sky sphere. The sky sphere itself is a very complex sphere. Oh no, Mr. Figueroa, we zoomed out. How do we get back? It's easy. Let's go ahead and select a floor piece and press F. There we go. We're back. Make sure I'm facing the correct direction. Now, personally, I like holding down right-click and pressing WASD when I'm navigating around. Just as a pro tip, if you're doing that, right now I'm holding down right-click and moving around with WASD. Scrolling up the mouse wheel while you're doing that increases your speed. I personally like it because you have a lot of control over your speed. I'm scrolling it up, scrolling it down. You can see how that affects the speed while I'm moving. You'll find a setting that you like. Over here we have which gizmo we have turned on. So we have our select tool, our move, rotate, and scale tool. We have the ability to cycle between which coordinate systems. I'll talk about that in the future. We have surface snapping, whether or not it's turned on. By default, objects like to snap to the surface if you drag them over, but surface snapping is not enabled by default. This just tries to make it a little bit more aggressive. We have our snap sizes. I'll talk about this shortly. We have our degree sizes for our rotations, and then we have our scale. So this is our move, rotate, and scale snaps. And then we have our camera speed. If you don't like using the right-click or the WASD right-click method and then scrolling the wheel up, you can change the base speed in here. And of course, we have access to different layouts up here. This is where the layout comes in handy. Personally, I'm just going to keep this viewport. All right. So your first assignment is I want you guys to play around. I want you guys to build something for me. In the content folder, we have a starter content folder. Inside the starter content folder, we have access to things like architecture. We have access to things like audio, blueprints, like a light. We have a bunch of lights. Don't use the HR. We have access to everything in the starter content. I know for some of you guys who are familiar with UE4, welcome to UE5 obviously, but this is probably remedial for you. This is fine. Just stick with it for the time being. There's stuff in the syllabus I think you're going to be interested in. If you feel like this is going slow, I understand. Just bear with me because there are people in this class of which the majority are brand new to this engine. Just try to have a little bit of patience for me in the process. We'll get to the good stuff. I promise. I promise we'll get to the good stuff. Let's go ahead and, let's see. I'm going to deselect that. I pressed L and left click to create a point light. Just like I said in the homework. Or you can go ahead and create lights. You can also drag a point light into the scene. Or a spotlight, or whatever. But this is default lit for you anyways. So as long as you leave the lighting alone, don't mess with the default stuff, you should be fine, whichever project that you want to work with. But let's go ahead and let's make something cute. Something nice and fun that starts with, we have props, for example. We have a rock. We have a table. Let's bring in a table. Cool. Now we have our table. We see that it's a static mesh. We can double click on this window over here, which opens up the static mesh editor. The static mesh editor is just a fancy tool that lives inside of the Unreal Engine or the Unreal Editor that lets us see what the asset is doing and what it's looking like and what it does. As you can see, let's go ahead and this should already be in, but let's go ahead and select our object. So because we have this open, we can actually view its collision to see if it actually does have some. Now by default it should. Let's go into show, yeah, that's where it is now. And we can use simple collision. Look at that. That little green box shows us that this object does in fact have collision. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window, and if we hit play, and we run into this thing, we see that we can collide with it. We can jump on it. Obviously that table's probably a little small, but that's okay. We can scale it up a little bit. As you can see, the snapping by default is turned on. Well, it's snapping to the grid by increments of 10. If we change the size here, we can see how we can change our snap sizes and how much more precise we can turn our snapping on. Oops, sorry. Now, as you can see, you can enable and disable. That's how you disable it. If you have it, if it's glowing blue, it's enabled. If it's turned off, you can see that we are not. It's just very smooth at this point. So we can, in fact, change the settings to see how we can scale in each direction. And you see that the grid changes based on what we're doing, which is really nice. It's a nice change from UE4 to UE5. So now if we hit play, we have this guy here, and it's a little bigger. Oh, it's probably too big now. No big deal. We can scale it down by 1 increment. There we go. Play. There we go. That's okay. It's a little big still, but whatever. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and put something together real quick. So you can see you have access to a bunch of props. You have access to stairs. But where you'll probably spend the most amount of time, you have access to shapes. You do have access to textures, for example. So if you want to apply a texture to everything, I'm going to select floor. I wrote floor up here in the search, so I can select everything very easily. I'm going to bump up my content browser. Well, now that I have all these selected, I don't need to bump open the content browser. I can just change them in here. You see how it's default material? We can go ahead and change it over here. Cool. As you can see, the nice thing about being able to select all these objects is that we have access to their details panel. And in the details panel is where you can make the most amount of changes to the most amount of things all at once. However, let's say you don't want that. Let's say you want to drag and drop. And so on and so forth. Personally, I do not like, see if we can dock and layout. Do that? Yeah, I don't like that so much. That's the old method. You can also drag and drop using this methodology, obviously. Let's display the two materials on that. I'm going to kick off this material on it. Oh, I kicked the material off in the other one. Whoops. It's because they're all selected. Just deselect that. And then let's say we find a better texture that we like. Like this one right here. We can actually drag that. This is a texture, so this drags a texture. But if we want to find our materials, for example, see if we can find the materials that we can use. It's actually a little bit easier if we go through here. This is just looking at our textures. We can look in the materials right here to see what we have. We can apply our material this way. Applying a texture is not necessarily as good as applying a material. It's worth applying a material. The difference between textures is textures are 2D and materials are what the material would look like in the 3D space. So I just dragged a texture out, and yeah, it looked like it worked, but only really works as applying a texture to an object, to like a blank space. It doesn't let us do anything. All it does is it kind of rudimentarily applies a shader to a texture sample. This is not how we want to do things. We want to actually physically apply materials. So in the materials panel, we can go ahead and apply anything that we want, and we'll get a response. And if we have a bunch of things selected, we can drag that onto them as well. Or we can drag this onto this over here into the materials, and then start making changes in the browser very, very quickly. Let's go ahead and go to the architecture. And I'm just going to let me throw something together real quick. This seems cute. We'll drag this out there. We'll rotate this way. We'll drag this out here. Rotate it this way. Cool, that's fine. We'll get some walls. We'll get one wall. Do we have a floor? I'll make that my ceiling. Move this up. Cool. Now I'm going to go into top view just to set this up real quick. Where is my... I'm going to click off a floor so that I can get my selections back. This is my wall door. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing here. Perspective. Okay, yeah, so that's forward. All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and make sure some of this is lined up. The nice thing about it is because we have snaps turned on, we can see that we can line things up fairly quickly. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of slap at the base, slap this bad boy in here. Is that good enough? Yeah, close enough. Slap that in there. And since I have it selected already, I'm going to Alt left click and I'm going to make another one. Alt left click, drag. And then I'm going to go back to my perspective view. Cool. And we'll just move this. Close enough to the location that we want. That's a cute little house, but the roof color doesn't match. Well, I'm going to select the face here, and as you can see, over here in the details panel, we have the ability to use a texture. This is already selected, so it's not going to do anything for us because it's already selected, so use is not going to do anything for us. However, if we have the object selected, we can search for that texture. So what I did was I click the browse button. This is a new button right here. Let's see what this does. I think I'm having a weird bug here. It's trying to open the texture, but it's not actually doing it for me. That's okay. That must be a documented bug because for some reason that's not working on my screen. No big deal. We can actually go ahead and find that texture. So we have the face of this object selected. In the details panel, we can select it, find it. We can click on the roof. Do you see how it's using the material basic floor? If we hit use, what it does is it uses whatever in the content browser. Ah, look at that. And let's say you get tired of having the content browser docked and you want it docked the way you used to have it. We can go to Window, and let's say you delete anything that you don't like. You can load layout. You can load the UE4 Classic layout, or you can use a default editor layout. And that brings back everything as it used to be. So there's almost no way that you can break this, guys. No way that you can break this. Put that down there. Let's bump the content open. Let's go ahead and look in... Where's that weird little glass thing? There we go. Another trick is if you want to snap things down, you can press the N button. Cool. So if you bring anything in, for example, I'm going to Alt and left click that and move it. Right-clicking an object will open up a bunch of different settings that you can use. Personally, I like using the snap aligns. My favorite button to use is the snap to floor, which is the end key. The pivot is located right there because that's just how this is made. Hitting N will snap it down to the ground, which is usually what I'll do if I'm making something. So let's say I wanted to make maybe another floor. I wanted to make maybe instead of this, I wanted to make another object to kind of build it up. You can build some very basic things using the default architecture. And your homework should be a representation of everything that I've covered today. So if you feel inclined to have some exploration, to change some things, for example, I'm going to go ahead and select my floor again because I want to select my floors. Now I don't want to select the other one, this floor 400 by 400, because that's actually my roof. I can rename that. I'm going to go ahead and select, you can see that it's displaying 3 materials. I'll display them. I'm going to get rid of all these materials. I'm going to maybe get some grass. Cool. See, it's easier to apply materials. Don't apply textures. Textures is kind of a rudimentary way to apply colors. Make sure you're applying materials. Materials are 3D, textures are 2D. It's a good way to kind of keep it in mind. Hit escape to deselect. So on and so forth. Look at all that. I want you guys to build me something. And once you guys are done, make sure you build, Control-Shift, semicolon, to build lighting. And let that build out. Oh, you see I left my mouse for a few seconds, so now it's auto-saving. I'm going to go ahead and save now. And we'll hit play. Now you can see that the shadows are not super pretty because we haven't set up our shadows or anything. But that'll be in the future. But as you can see, we have kind of a cute little setup. Obviously we shouldn't have this here. But this works for your purposes. Don't be afraid to explore and add things. As you can see, I'm applying new textures over here. Or, if you're feeling enticed, you have the object selected and you go to Materials. You can actually physically drag that material onto the object and it'll update. Let's pick another one about that ground. Don't be so intimidated by this menu. This menu is going to have a lot of stuff in it that you don't necessarily want to use. As you can see here, some common stuff. You can also copy the reference, you can copy a file path, you can look at the viewer, you can look at the size that it consumes, everything it references. You can open it, you can connect the source control. This is just managing the content browser, so to speak. But you can drag things out of the content browser and apply them to objects by either finding them over here in the browser, by dragging them in and out. You can drag them in physically, but because the new layout dock puts things over it, this gets kind of weird. Or you can drag things directly onto an object. You can see that it's going to update. And we got some beautiful grass. The last thing I want to leave you guys with is we can, in fact, modify the lighting as well. This that I have selected, and I'm going to go ahead and delete, I'm going to rename this before I forget here. So this is now my roof 1. I'm going to deselect my floor. Cool. If we have our light selected, this is our light source, our directional light. If we rotate it, we can see that we can change things like its direction and time of day. I'll talk more about this in the future. But that's all I really kind of want to cover. Let's double check to make sure I'm covering everything that I want. I talked about file structure. As you can see, our map, our level is not saved. We can save it. You can open up the content browser. And I'm just going to collapse everything that we were working on. It's always safe if we modified any assets to just hit save all. As you can see, we've modified our brick, clay, old matte, that texture. I'm not going to save that because I don't want that modified. So I'm going to hit cancel. So when you close this, it's going to complain that you didn't save something. It just wants you to be sure that you are saving everything that you need to save, and vice versa. The last thing that you might want to do is you might want to add a light or two. You can hold L and then left click to make a light. And I'm not going to worry too much about whether or not they have the right attenuation or anything. If you want to control the intensity over here, it's in the details panel. We'll worry about lighting in a future demo, okay? I just want you guys to build something cute for me because it shows me that you guys have watched this demo and you guys are able to follow along instructions, start a file that you have Unreal 5 located, you can get it running on your machine, and you can do all the things that you need to do to get it done. All right. That is everything that I wanted to cover for this particular week. So do me a favor, guys. Just have some fun with it. This is going to be real scary. Like, these menus are scary. These menus are really scary. Like, they really are. They really, really are. Like, as actions, like, what does that mean? Like, what does that even mean? None of that makes sense to the lay person, but trust me, this is a lot easier than it looks. If you are even remotely close to understanding what I've covered in this particular demo, you are going to be good to go. But let me go ahead and wrap up this particular recording, and I will see you guys in the last one for the outro. Actually, before I do the outro, watch what happens when I close it. It might complain, it might not. See, I moved around on the map and I changed the light. I added a light and removed it. It's asking me if I want to save that. I don't want to save the brick, clay, old material because that's actually part of the engine. By changing that, you might change it in your engine. No big deal. I'll show you guys how to fix that later if you accidentally do change something. Yeah, let's save our map. Save selected. Boom. Everything that you've done is now saved. So if you really wanted to, you can go into the actual file itself. Now watch what's going to happen. Yes, I want to open this in Unreal 5. This is started the project in Unreal 5. It's a bug that they haven't fixed. They will fix it. Oh no, Mr. Figueroa, my map. It's actually in our maps folder. You can see it wants a light bake because I changed the lighting. How do we set that map for our default? That's actually pretty simple. Settings, project settings, maps and modes, editor startup map, game default map. I'm going to change that to, not my starter map. What was that? That's my level 2 map. That's saved by default. Cool. Close the project. Open it again. And we're back. I'll see you guys in the next one.